Good evening, friends. It gives me great pleasure to join together with you in Torah study. We're going to be studying chapter 7 in Masechtas Eruvin. Tonight's class is dedicated in loving memory of my dear mother, Rivka Bas Harav Shloimeh. In this chapter, primarily the discussion is going to be about when two people can make an Eruv Chatzeris and when they must make separate Eruvin. Now, I want to clarify something here from the outset that's important to understand, and this is going to be applicable a number of times in the discussions tonight. Where, as I just mentioned, we're going to be discussing in which cases do you make one joint Eruv, and in which cases does each party make their own Eruv. It's important to understand that these are two different types of Eruvs. Meaning to say, if they are going to be required to make two Eruvs, so then the Eruv that they're going to make is going to be an Eruv that requires either a gate or a string or something of that nature. Whereas an Eruv Chatzeris is an Eruv of courtyards where we're commingling two courtyards together, which would still indeed need either a string enclosure or a gate enclosure. So when we say that the people have to make separate Eruvs, they're not making a separate Eruv Chatzeris, because the Eruv Chatzeris in the colloquial sense means where we're joining two courtyards as one. Where we talk about Eruv, just the name Eruv, we're talking about either poles with a line or a fence around. Is that clear? So maybe on the first instance I'll explain it, but in the next instances, try to remember that point, that when we're talking about the two separate Eruvs, if everybody has to make their own Eruv, it's not what we would typically call the Eruv Chatzeris. Okay, Mishna Aleph. Chalon shebein shtei Chatzeris. Arba al arba b'sei chasara. If there's a window between two courtyards, so imagine your backyard and your neighbor's backyard, and you have a fence around the front and the back, and now in houses together. Yeah. Now, but there's a partition, there's a fence in between your backyard and their backyard. Okay? Now, there's a window in this fence that is 4 handbreadths by 4 fists by 4 fists, 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. So it has an opening with which you two can communicate. Now, b'sei chasara. Now, where is this window? This window is from 10 fists high to the floor. You with me? So you have a window, and it's pretty low. The window is less than about 30 inches high. Says the Mishna Eruvin Shnayim. So the halacha is that because you have a communication between both properties, so now what you can do is you can make one Eruv together with each other, and that allows you to bring things from your house into your backyard, which would be obvious because we already have a gate around it. But it also allows you to pass things through that window, which ordinarily you would not be allowed to do. And furthermore, you could pass things over the fence. So, which otherwise you would not be able to do. Why? Because you cannot pass from your backyard to another person's backyard, because even though they're both a private domain, but they're two different private domains. Bimratsu, and if they want, they could join together in an Eruv and go through the process of making an Eruv Chatzeris. Bimratsu, marvin echad, or if they want, they could just make their own Eruv. In other words, they can make sure that their own property is surrounded and carry in and out of their property. So, which would not allow them, not give them the option to pass things from one neighbor to the next. However, pachas ma'arba al arba, if the window is less than 4 fists by 4 fists, 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim, or the window is higher than 10 fists high, it's about over 30 inches or so, ma'orvin shnayim, each person has to worry about his own enclosure, ve'ein ma'orvin echad, and they cannot now go ahead and try to say that they have one big backyard. Why? Because they have a proper divider between the two properties, and so therefore they're separate, and you can't pass things from one to the next. Bays. Everybody following? Good. Bays. Koisel shebein shtei chatzeres. If you have a wall between two courtyards, gavoya asara, now it is 10 fists high, it's 10 tfachim high, v'rochav arba, and the width of this wall is 4 cubits wide. So now we have an interesting situation going on. Not only, now the first halacha in this Mishnah is obvious. Ma'orvin shnayim ve'ein ma'orvin echad. Because there's no communication, we have no window and passageway between one and the next. So therefore it's obvious that each person, each courtyard, has to make their own eruv and worry about their own enclosures, and they can't pass from one to the next. Ma'orvin shnayim, so each one takes care of their own eruv. Ve'ein ma'orvin echad, and they cannot combine their properties into one. You have a question?
The thickness of the wall?
The thickness of the wall is 4 tvachim. Now, what happens? If on top of this wall, so now we have a wall, it's pretty wide actually. It's a thick wall that they've made. And sitting on top of this wall, which again is not that high, it's, you're imagining this high wall. It's not that high. It could be 30 something inches. Now, if fruit is sitting on top of this wall, so what you could do is you could jump up onto this wall from this side and eat the fruit. And the other person, and the other people from the other neighbor can sit down on the wall, climb up on the wall, literally ascend to the wall, but it's not necessarily such a great ascension when it's only not that high. And they can eat. However, you have to understand that because now this wall is its own rishus, so to speak, it's its own domain. So now you can't bring down the fruit or put up fruit from either side of this wall.
And you can't carry anything else in between.
You can't, of course, yes, of course, you can't pass things over. That goes without saying. Nifrit Sahakaisel, what happens if you have this wall? So again, imagine your backyards, and you have this neighbor, and this wall that divides, that's 10 tfachim high. Let's say it gets breached. So if it's breached, ad eser amas, if it's up to 10 amas, cubits, 10 cubits, so then, ma'orvin shnayim, v'mratzu ma'orvin echad. Now you have options available to you because it's similar to the first Mishnah. In the first Mishnah, what did we have to communicate between the two? Just a window. Here, we don't even have a window. Here we have a whole opening I can walk through. So if this wall is breached, so you have a long wall and one section falls down. So if one section falls down and it's up to 10 cubits long, this breach, Marvin Stein, so you can make separate Eruvs and you can make one Eruv either way. But if you want, you could make it one Eruv. You can combine the two because this breach, don't call it a breach, call it an entranceway between one property and the next. But if it's wider than 10 cubits, so now wider than 10 cubits is a huge breach. And so therefore, Ma'arvin Echad, you can't consider you can't make your own Eruv. You would have to put up actual
it becomes like a mavor.
It becomes too proper. It's you don't have your own enclosure here. You're already moving into the enclosure of the next person. And so therefore, since you don't have your privacy, quote unquote, because there's a breach of more than 10, it's not about privacy or not privacy. So then it requires you, if you want to carry, even in your own backyard, it requires you to make an Eruv Chatzeros with the neighbor. And now not only could you carry in your backyard, but you can carry from your backyard to the other backyard, because now it is a joint yard.
What about that, where, for instance, you go in on a loaf of bread and...
That's what we're talking about. That's an Eruv Chatzeros. That is an Eruv Chatzeros.
Cubits or amos is what, like 2x a fist? 3x?
No. It's about 18 inches or so. 18, 19 inches, 20 inches.
Elbow
Something like that.
to the tip of your finger. That's an amma.
Gimel. Choretz shebein shnei chatzeres. So now, the halacha is going to be similar to what we've learned before. Just in the inverse. Instead of having a wall that's 10 tfachim high and 10 tfachim wide.
4.
I'm sorry, and 4 tfachim wide. Thank you. Now we're going to have a ditch, a trench. Choretz shebein shtei chatzeres. If you have a trench between 2 courtyards, omik asara. The trench is deep, 10 fists deep. V'rochav arba, and it's 4 fists wide. So now, Eruvin shnayim, in this particular case, you can join the 2 properties, because a ditch is the inverse of a wall high, and that's considered a demarcation of your property, just like a fence is. And so therefore, Eruvin shnayim, each person worries about his own enclosure by himself. So there's 2 Eruvs, quote unquote. Ve'ein ma'arvin echad. But you cannot combine the 2 courtyards as one, because they're not. Why? Because it's not comfortable till we go. Listen, when you have a wall, you can climb over the wall easily, but it's because it's not easily to climb over this wall. So therefore, it's considered 2 properties. Same thing here. When it's wider than 4 tfachim, it's considered not comfortable to cross from one side to the next, although one is able to probably, if you're just a little bit athletic, or just slightly, not slightly. So you don't have to be very athletic. It's,
It's
not
like this, and it's like a yard.
not a big deal, but it's not comfortable. And being that it's not a comfortable cross, so therefore it separates your 2 properties. So therefore, Ma'arvin shnayim ve'ein ma'arvin echad, you cannot join the 2 properties. Afilu malikashay teven, even if a person went ahead and put stubble or straw into this ditch. So now when you're looking at it, it looks like it's 1. Right? Nevertheless, it's 2 properties. Why? Because again, how are we gauging this? If you know that there's straw or stubble in the thing, you're not going to step on it. Why? Because you're going to trip. You don't have a solid ground to stand on. And it's uncomfortable to cross that way. But, what?
Putting straw into a hole is the
That's a separate thing, whether it's a dangerous thing or not. That's a separate discussion that's not discussed here. But whether you can hurt somebody, that's a very good question. But if you fill it up with dirt or pebbles, so in such a case, ma'arvin echad ve'ein ma'arvin shnayim. You can't now separate this. It's not a separation. It's considered a solid footing. Somebody would be willing to walk across, and it's actually somewhat, quote unquote, comfortable to cross. So therefore, you can only make a joint Eruv as opposed to making 2 separate Eruvs. Daled. So now let's understand the same case where you have a ditch, a trench that's 10 deep, 10 fists deep, and 4 fists wide, and it's going along the property lines. So now, what did a person do? In order to make it comfortable for a person to pass from one side to the next, he put a board that's wide 4 tfachim. So now he has just created a comfortable passageway. V'chein shtei gusteroyes. Zay keneged zay. Similarly, if a person had two porches, a marpeset, and each porch is facing the other porch, and now what a person does is he puts a board between the end of his porch and the beginning of the next porch, and now down below, the question would be, the question is below, does each person have to mark out their own property and access to their own property? The way I imagine it would be with a string and lechis, so that when they go out the first floor of their house, there, so now they have their own marked out area, or can they join by virtue of now we're joined because on our porches we have an easy passageway from one house to the next? You following?
On the second floor.
I'm sorry?
It's as if it is one house.
Or is it as if it's one house? It says the Mishna, Ma'arvin shnayim v'imrotzim ma'arvin echad. If they want, they could make their own Eruvs, or they can join the two together. Why? Again, because now something that's 4 tvachim wide is somewhat comfortable to walk across. I don't know if I would do this on a very high level, but maybe on a half level, I could see myself crossing something like that without too much worry.
And it's more permanent and stable than straw. And
Well, straw is not considered anything, but here we have a board, a solid board that's allowing communication between one porch and the next, to be able to movement from one porch to the next.
Now, do you need to use the board to make the movement, or the fact that it exists?
The fact that it exists, you don't have to. When you make an Erev Chatzeres, I never have to actually go into your yard or not. It just
Well,
happens.
if you did, can you walk on, say, on the roadway?
Well, it's not on a roadway. Roadways would be, we're not talking about a roadway. Here we're talking one house that's facing another house, and then down below, what's going on down below?
Okay, what's on, okay, so the grass or the gravel.
So the grass or the gravel. So first of all, between the two houses, we would need on both sides, we would need connecting, we would need walls.
The board.
Yeah, but here we're just creating, we're joining the two houses by virtue of a narrow board, which is only 4 tvachim wide, between two porches. That already allows us to consider this house as one. You have a good picture there? There, I'll put it on the camera. There we go. So, okay. Thank you. That's helpful. But if the board is narrower than 4 tvachim wide, so now again, as we said before, it's uncomfortable to cross over. And so that does not join the two. So if you wanted to make an Eruv below, each person would have to create his own enclosure for his courtyard. They cannot enclose the two courtyards together. Masbein shebein shtei chatzeres. If you have a haystack that's between two courtyards, gavoy asar tvachim, and its height is 10 tvachim. So this is now a makeshift fence, a makeshift barrier. So ma'arvin shnayim ve'im ma'arvin echad. So you make 2 eruvs and not 1. Why? Because again, it would be uncomfortable to pass between one side and the other. Now, says the Mishnah, nevertheless, even though this is your makeshift wall and you have established each as a separate property before Shabbos, the 2 people on either side could take from this hay and give feed to their animals from this haystack. And we're not worried that we're going to eat, the animals in each courtyard are going to eat so much that we're going to completely destroy the wall. Why? Because animals don't eat that much. You could take and it's an unusual thing. So therefore the Chachamim don't make any gezerah against using this as feed. on Shabbos. Nisma'et, it should be noted that you can only feed animals that belong to you on Shabbos. You cannot, and that depend on you. You can't feed animals that don't belong to you on Shabbos. And this makes sense, of course, here, because these animals are in your courtyard. That's what we're talking about. Now, if this was reduced to less than 10 tefachim, ostensibly before Shabbos we're talking about here, marvin echad ve'ein marvin shnayim. So in such a case, now you don't have a wall that's 10 tefachim high. So in which case you have to be concerned with your neighbor. You have to make a joint eruv and not your own enclosure. Vav, ketzad mishtatfin b'mavoy. So now we're asking a question: what is the process of making a shituf mavoy? Shituf mavoy is very similar to an eruv chatzeres, just it has to do with an alleyway as opposed to courtyards. It's an alleyway off of a Rishus Harabim. Maniach hasachaviz v'himer. You place the barrel of whatever it's going to be, wine, oil, by somebody. V'himer. And you say, Harei zeh l'chol b'nei movi. This belongs to all the residents of the alleyway. Everybody's house who opens into this alleyway is part of this. So now, one person could sponsor it for everybody. One person could have a jug of oil, big jug of oil, and or we'll discuss how big. A jug of oil. We'll keep it at that for now. A jug of oil and say, okay, let's say all of us here, our house is open into this alleyway. So I say, this is for everybody in the alleyway. So now, how do I acquire this for you? How do I acquire this for you? So I have to give it to somebody else who's going to acquire it for you on your behalf. Because you don't all have to show up. You don't have to be present here for this. So how do I do this? I can do this. I can give it to my older daughter or my older son, and they can lift it up for you on behalf of all of you here. You with me? Or my Jewish slave or my Jewish maidservant. They too can be makna it for you. They can acquire it for you. Or my wife can do it. I can pass it to her. She picks it up, and she's picking it up for all of you here, so that all of you who open up into the alleyway can now carry into the alleyway. Avol, however, but his minor son or daughter, or his not for a son and daughter that's under majority, nor by his Gentile slave or maidservant, because they are not considered their own domain or their own person. You are their person. Their hand is like your hand. And so they're an extension of you. Being that they're an extension of you, so there was no one other than you who was acquiring it for them, on their behalf.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, on their behalf. What happens if the food became diminished? Whatever food that you established became diminished. Diminished to what? So we don't know yet what level the diminished is. Hold the thought, and in the next Mishnah we're going to talk about it. If the food became diminished, moisif umezake. So you could just add on and confer possession to the people who are part of this now shituf mavoy. Vein sarich lohidia, and you don't have to tell them that. So let's say now the requisite amount became diminished, and now you want to add. I don't have to go around to all the members of the alleyway and tell them, it was diminished, and I added on to you. I added on for you. You could just do it. But if more people open up their yards into the mavoi, so now previously a person was closed off to the mavoi. He had a different way he was going out of his house, but now he has an entrance to this alleyway. Moisifu mezaka, so you can add on to the minimum requirement and give it to somebody else to acquire it on his behalf. But you have to let him know. Now, the Gemara in Eruvin explains why you would have to let somebody know that you included them in a shituf mavoy. The Gemara explains that this is not talking about an ordinary case. Because if it's talking about an ordinary case where a typical case that we've been discussing all along, where you have one alleyway and houses that open into this alleyway, so what does the guy need to know for? Why do you have to let him know? What's the difference? Whether he knows or not, you've included him in, and later on you could let him know.
To make him partner.
So, initially, how do we make him partner? Not by going to him and having him be makna or join in. I gave it to my older son who took it on his behalf. Why would I have to let him know? So the Gemara explains that this is talking only about a case where a person has two mavos. He has two alleyways, one on one side of his house and one on another side of his house. Now, one on one side of his house and one on another side of his house. I'm sorry?
One might be more comfortable.
So now, according to this theory, says the Gemara, according to this Tana, he would hold that you can only make a shituf mavois on one side of your house. You can't make a shituf mavoy on two alleyways on both sides. Others say no. You could do it on both sides. But again, according to this Tana, at least, or says the Gemara, he would hold that you can't make a shituf mavoy on both sides. And so therefore, maybe he wants the other side. So you'd have to let him know and he would have to agree to it. But according to everybody, if there's only one alleyway, if people's access is only through one alleyway, so what's the difference? You let him know or not let him know? You can benefit somebody even without them knowing. Ches, kama hu shiurei. So we said before, if the amount of food was diminished, how much is the share? What is the quantity? Bisman shein merubin, when there's a lot of people. So let's say it's a very long alleyway and there's 100 people whose doors open into this alleyway. Mozin shtei sudos lekula. The amount of food that it would take for one person to have 2 meals is enough for the entire. It doesn't matter how many people are on there. So 2 meals worth. That's it. Not 2 meals for everybody, 2 meals for one person. Bizman shehein mu'atin. But when they are few people, let's say it's only 10 people, kegroiges. It's the volume, the volume of a dried fig. Mahitzah Shabbos. Just like for a person to violate Shabbos, how much by carrying from one domain to another domain, what is the minimum required amount of foodstuff that he needs to carry? Is kegroiges. Is the amount of a dried fig. So the kol echad ve'echad. So a dried fig size for each person, for each household.
The food that's placed out there, does that have to be left untouched
No.
during Shabbat?
Does it have to be left untouched for Shabbat? So that is, why don't we learn the next Mishnah?
Okay.
Okay, Amar Rabbi Yesi. Rabbi Yesi says, "B'med dvarim amurim." When b'med dvarim amurim, when do these words apply? That we have a minimum quantity for the Eruv. When does this apply? B'schilas Eruv, when we first make the Eruv. So we're making an Eruv for our alleyway. So when we're establishing it, then we need, if we have a lot of people, the maximum amount of 2 su'udas for one person. That's enough, no matter how many people. Or a kegregius for each person. But aval b'shiyarei erev, once the erev is established, and now we're just having remnants of this erev kolshu. So long as there's a tiny amount, it's still valid. Lo yamru la'arev b'chatzeres ela kadei shelo l'shakeach es hatiknekis. And why is this? And what is the point here? The reason why we have an Erev Chatzeres, why do we make this Erev Chatzeres? Is because children who are not going all over the place, they're not going to the market, they're not going far. Well, the kids, where do the kids stay? They stay home. So now they start saying, I can carry from my neighbor to the neighbor's neighbor to the Mavi, down the block. So by making this Erev Chatzeres, people talk about it. People talk about it, the kids learn that, hey, you can only go to a certain point. At the end of the Mavi, there's only places you can go. We have to do something in order to join in. It keeps the discussion going so that they realize that you can't carry everywhere and in all places. Yud. I'll share with you a little story. I once saw, there was once a very clearly observant Israeli fellow carrying his child on Kingston Avenue. He was from Israel. He was a guest, and in Crown Heights there was no Erev, and he's carrying his daughter. Now his daughter looked like she could walk on her own, so it's half a problem. But the point is, people started telling him Shabbos, carrying. He didn't know what they wanted. It was so clear what the story was. He grew up in Israel. There's Erevs everywhere, and he simply was unfamiliar with the fact that you can't carry. It was astonishing, and I remember then I was pretty young at the time, and it made a huge impression on me. Here you have a grown man who doesn't even know what you want from him. It's like me telling you, carbon tamid. Like, I know what a carbon tamid is, but what do you want from me? like. Korban Pesach. Yes. What about it?
So you run out, you get all that.
Yeah. But if I told you that, but I told you now, Korban, you don't know what I want from you. I mean, you know what, you're familiar with the topic, but it's ancient. So this is precisely what the Chazal were looking to avoid by making these rules. To have to worry about eros, to have to worry about things, to ask these questions so that people grow up and understand that this is a serious possibility of a serious violation on Shabbos. You can use any food to make an eruv or a shituf mavoy. Except for water and salt, because they have no nourishment. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, these are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua says, Kikuru Erev. When we talk about an Erev Chatzeres, it has to be a kikkur, a loaf of bread, and a whole loaf. Afilu ma'afas sa'ah v'hu prusa. Even if it's a sa'ah, it's a big loaf, but it's broken. Ein ma'arvin ba. You cannot use it for an Erev Chatzeres. Kikkur be'isr, but if it's a small kikkur, it's a small bilkala, v'hu shalim, but it's complete. Ma'arvin ba, you could use it for the Erev Chatzeres. Yud Aleph Neisan Adam Malachen Vani Ulanachtim Kadesh Yizakale Erev Divri Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says that a person could give a more kesef, a small amount of money, to the baker or to the storekeeper. So Kadesh Yizakale Erev, so that he will have him be included in the Erev. What does this mean? He says, so he's going out of town, and bakeries are open up early in the morning, and he's going out of town, and he's not going to be able to join his neighbors, and so he just leaves it, makes a deposit with the baker, and he says, you owe this money. When they come to get the Erev, you purchase in for me. So Rabbi Eliezer says it's no problem. And the Chacham say, his money is not his money is not at the chenveni, or the baker or the grocer cannot do this for him, because it's like a conflict of interest, because he's selling the food to these guys, and these are his customers, and now he's the buyer for the other person. He can't be the buyer and the seller at the same time. But but somebody else could instead of the grocer or the it's an interesting halacha here. Basically, the Chachamim are saying, because this is the person who's selling the thing, he can't purchase it for him. But anybody else can do it. You can give it to somebody else and say, you're going to buy in for me.
Another customer stare at the
an
bacon.
employee, like the guy who's
Yeah, I guess.
Or another customer.
Yeah. So when those guys come to buy, you're my representative. Now, take off the shin over here. It says she'ain. Just trust me on this. It seems like it continues. Ein ma'arvin l'adam ela medaite. You cannot make an eruv for somebody except with his knowledge. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, when do we say that you can't make an eruv for somebody except when he knows? When it comes to an eruv tchumen, which now, if he's going to join in your eruv and he's going to gain 2,000 amas that way, he loses it on the other way, and so therefore he has to know about it, because he can't. He may want to go the other way. But he says over here, but when it comes to the eruv chatzeris, you can be eruv for a person with his knowledge and without his knowledge, because you can convenient a person, or you can benefit a person before him when he's not present. But you cannot disadvantage a person when he's not standing before you. And so in a case of eruv tchumen, or in the case, like we said before, according to the Tana, who says that you can't make a shituf mavoy on both sides, in such a case, according to that Tana, so in such cases, you can't just make a move without letting the guy know maybe he wants to do the other way. In the case of the shituf mavoy, in the case of the alleyway, he may want to use the other alleyway. In the case of an eruv tchumen, you can't just make a eruv for somebody without his knowledge. He may not be pleased with this. He may want to go to the east, to the west, to the south, and you're making it in the north. And whatever you gain on one side, you lose on the other side. And so therefore, explains Rabbi Yehuda that this is only talking about a case where you can possibly disadvantage him. But in a place where you can't disadvantage him, there's no disadvantage, so it's obvious that you can indeed benefit him and make an eruv for him while he is not present. Thank you so much for joining us. Please join us again next week for chapter 8 of Eruvin. Have a very good evening.